Inc. is out doing their Black Friday shopping. I think Alan Karpik's been camped outside Walmart for the last 4 days straight, getting his his bargain basement deals.
Yeah.
So we and maybe two others in a broom are left here inside the TV studio to bring you the big show this afternoon. Well, Brian, a lot to get to, I guess, today between football and basketball. We'll start with a little bit of football. There's a bucket game tomorrow, and Purdue needs to win to get bowl eligible.
Have we had a weekend with this much drama anytime recently? I mean, you've got a one-game playoff for a bowl game. You've got senior day with a couple of guys going out that you really want to root for. I mean,
Yeah.
I think what Robert Marr's been able to do these past couple of weeks has been a pretty good story. Hopefully Ralph Bolden gets to play some. That's been a really good story. Obviously, you want to see those guys go out well in Ross-Ade Stadium. And then the whole coaching thing. You know, this could be Danny Hope's last game in Ross-Ade Stadium for all we know. So we got all this wrapped into one.
Yeah.
So we got plenty of stuff to talk about here for the next however long we're on this show.
Well, I'm sure we'll be asked about Ralph, and we probably don't really know much more than what we knew on Tuesday, which was that he's questionable, and we'll see if he is able to go. It would be a shame. It's like the Indiana game has been sort of his nightmare every year.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the hamstring a few years back when he was on the verge of getting a 1,000-yard season, then of course tearing his ACL last year, and now the chance that he perhaps won't play on senior day tomorrow against the Hoosiers because of the hamstring last week against Illinois. So, here we are. Who would have guessed? Purdue was, 3-6 a couple of weeks ago and looking pretty bad at doing 3-6 after losing 5 in a row. And they beat a couple of teams. Granted, they're not world
Struggling,
beaters
yeah.
in Iowa and Illinois, but a chance to get back to a bowl game. In a lot of years, I'd say, it's a must. You got to get back. But with some of the other things that may be going on around the program, is it as big a must tomorrow?
I think it's an absolute must right now. When you talked about this season kind of a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, in terms of what you needed to accomplish this season, going 6-6 in the regular season and going back to a bowl game wasn't it. This season had to be about something more. That's what the whole narrative about last season was. Well, they got to 6-6. They didn't always look good doing it. What you wanted last year to be was a step towards something bigger. And right now what Purdue's trying to do is trying to just break even. And that kind of in the grand scheme of things really isn't enough. But still, where you are right now, relative to where you were 3 weeks ago, obviously you want to end the season on a 3-game winning streak, get back to the postseason, because as insignificant as they might seem sometimes, bowl games are important for programs.
Yeah. Just a reminder of how this show works. If you want to interact with us, it's hard to believe people would actually want to do that, but if you do want to, you can chat below, ask us some questions about whatever you'd like, football, basketball. Brian's a big fencing expert, I think. Whatever you have, you can do that.
Luge.
Luge. I know, huge luge fan. We should thank our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn. When tomorrow is a big day, stay at HGI tonight. Also, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. You can reach him at trentismyagent.com, or you can also call him, like I had to do earlier this week, at 765-743-9595. We won't go into details of why I needed to call my insurance agent. And also follow its Purdue Pride and Purdue Game Day, a Purdue Game Day tradition since 1945. Special thanks to Jeff Julik and our sponsors for the show. So, Indiana comes in 4-7. It was only a couple of weeks ago for them. They were a little crazily talking about the Rose Bowl possibilities, and they saw those go away and bowl hopes go away as well. But a dangerous team, I think. Their offense is pretty good. Defense is not so much,
so good,
but they can score with people.
Yeah. I mean, they're the number one passing team in the Big Ten, and I don't know if Purdue's been I don't know if Purdue's seen a passing game like this since Marshall. Obviously, Marshall put up a lot of points on Purdue. Obviously, a lot of them were in garbage time. A couple of those points came off a blocked punt, if I recall correctly, too.
Yeah.
So, this is the sort of offense Purdue hasn't seen lately. The last 2 weeks, Purdue's played completely dysfunctional offenses, and now you're going to see a pretty functional one, to say the least. Purdue should be able to have its way on offense if they perform the way they have in these last couple of games, but obviously Indiana's offense is going to give Purdue all it can handle, I'd have to think.
Yeah, I mean, they like to run up-tempo, get as many plays in as they can. They run the ball a little bit, but I think everything mostly is, try to throw the ball underneath a little. And, Purdue's defense has played better, I think, the last couple of weeks, but they've done so against first a more
Dysfunctional
traditional
offenses, yeah.
offense and then just
Yeah.
a completely dysfunctional one.
A complete train wreck,
Yeah,
we can put it. Yeah.
Complete change. Illinois' best, their best play last week was when everything went, you know what?
Correct.
And
Correct.
Shieldhouse just ran for his life.
Correct.
But, against an actual spread where they can spread you
Yeah.
out and, get some matchups that are favorable against Purdue's linebackers, I think that poses a little bit of an issue.
Well, something that kind of concerns you tomorrow is when you face an offense like this that is going to throw a lot of short passes, get rid of it very quickly, it's going to be hard to get, pressure on the quarterback, and that's something Purdue has done reasonably well the last 2 weeks. That's contributed to its success. You also have to tackle very well because they're going to get the ball out in space to people. You have to make open field tackles. Purdue's done a pretty good job the last couple weeks tackling, but that can always, just sort of the way things have gone with Purdue these last couple months, last couple years even, is sometimes that stuff is fleeting and it just goes away.
Yeah.
The other thing you worry about with IU is if you remember the Minnesota game, they jumped a lot of short routes and they got beat deep a couple times. And you have to be really careful against Indiana because they're going to throw a lot of little 5-7 yard passes. And then what they're doing is they're trying to set you up for something bigger. And you just have to make sure they have to earn everything they get. Don't give them any easy ones.
The chat is now live, by the way, so if you do want to chime in with a question or two for Brian or me, you can do so. It was inactive there at the start. This is Gold and Black Live. We'll get you set as best we can for the football game tomorrow as the Boilermakers taking on the Hoosiers for the bucket. So bowl possibilities for Purdue if they do get the victory. It looks like probably one of two, either Meineke in Houston or the Heart of Dallas Bowl, which was formerly the Ticket City Bowl, which is played in the Cotton Bowl. And
What
the
could
Heart of
possibly go
Dallas
wrong?
Bowl is in Dallas, which Stacy asked me where that was a couple of.
Wait,
She's probably watching.
Is
right
it the
now.
Heart of Dallas Bowl, or the Heart of Texas? I thought it was Heart
Heart
of
of
Texas.
Dallas? In Dallas.
Okay.
So that's the bowl possibility. So it's a chance, I guess, to play. And not quite as cool as it used to be, but a chance to play on New Year's Day if you get
Yeah,
into
I
the Heart of Dallas Bowl.
I think that's a little bit watered down. About 10 years ago, or hell, about 5 years ago, you used to look at playing on New Year's Day as the absolute barometer for your program. If you could get to New Year's Day, you were doing a lot of things right. You were a great to elite program if you were playing on New Year's Day every year. Now it's,
Well, it used to be that when Purdue played the Outback Bowl in 2000, right? Yeah.
1999 season,
1999 season.
first day of 2000.
When all our ATM cards still worked at midnight down there in Ybor City the night before.
Yep.
I think the Outback Bowl was the only game on at noon on New Year's Day, and now
Yeah, it was the first game played in
Yeah.
the new year. It was the first game to start that day.
Now I
that
think
was a
there's
pretty
at
big-
least 3 games during that time slot now on New Year's Day. So
Yeah. And how many of them matter?
just one probably.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
All right, we get a good question from LDM who asks our thoughts on Big Ten expansion, which, away from just here at Purdue, has also been big news in the last week with the addition of Maryland and Rutgers. What do you think, Brian?
I understand it because I know people like money, just like I like money, but I don't necessarily like it. I think part of what has made the Big Ten great all these years is, this sort of Midwestern feel to it. You've got places like Chicago where an Iowa alum can't go down the street without bumping into an Illinois alum, vice versa. There's geographic integrity to it. You have natural associations with all its members. You also have great rivalries. Now, when they added Nebraska last year, they told us it was an appropriate cultural fit because the mindset in Nebraska is a lot like Iowa. It's your typical Big Ten sort of deal. Now it's like the Big Ten has gone from a lakefront conference in a sense to an oceanside conference. I just don't know how Rutgers and Maryland fit in from a recruiting standpoint, just from a cultural standpoint, more than anything. But I understand really all this is a big game of Monopoly, where you just have to go get as many properties as you can.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's not much. I could understand Nebraska and Penn State. I think, I can't tell you.
Fits.
Yeah, I can't tell you why I get that a little bit more, but it just feels right a little bit. But Rutgers and Maryland, I don't know. I mean, there's just not a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of tradition there of any sort. I guess the women's basketball team has some tradition of
Well-
some odd sort with Maryland a little bit here
I-
recently with getting some of their transfers. But other than that,
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem like a whole lot.
I think what you did with Nebraska and Penn State is you brought in two of college football's greatest brands. I mean, those are two national programs. Everyone around the country knows Nebraska football. Everyone around the country knows Penn State football. Those are two gigantic brands, and they both really enhance the Big Ten. And now it's just like they just kind of kicked open the door to take some other people. That isn't anything against Rutgers or Maryland. I mean, they both have their redeeming qualities, but at the same time, they wouldn't seem like no-brainers. They don't immediately bring something to the conference didn't already have.
You're from,
Except
you're
for
from
money,
New Jersey.
except for TV
You know a lot
markets.
about Rutgers, don't you?
I am from New Jersey, yes, and I'm still saying what I'm saying. I don't know what Rutgers really brings to the Big Ten other than TV sets. Hopefully, for the Big Ten's sake, they bring TV sets.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a done deal. Quite
Well,
yet.
and I mean, the big thing, as you mentioned earlier, is the money, and the contract comes up with ESPN in 2016, and
17, isn't it?
16 or 17, whatever. But there's a chance for a lot of money for the Big Ten, and thus a lot of schools. What I think is interesting is that Purdue talks about putting more money, if this happens, into facilities or assistant coaches' salaries or what have you. But everyone moves
Right,
up
everyone
the same
gets
amount.
the same money. So it's like, okay, Purdue gets X number of million more dollars a year, but so does Ohio State.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the problem is, where's you can't have a salary cap for, certainly not for players. You can't have it for administrators or for facilities
yeah,
or,
coaches' salaries.
or
exactly.
whatever. So everybody just sort of
Exactly.
moves up together, which,
Exactly.
I'm not
So
sure how much.
It's all just a matter of scale now.
Yeah.
If all this added money allows Purdue to pay its head coach another $500,000 a year, well, great. It allows Ohio State to pay its head coach another $1 million.
Yeah.
So.
All right, we'll turn our attention back to Purdue. And, well, first of all, I wanted to ask this. About the expansion, do you see it, where's the end? Is it 16 teams?
I think
Is it
16.
18?
I think 16 is probably reasonable. If you look at the Big Ten logo they put out last year, it kind of looks like a 16 already. So I wonder if they didn't kind of tip their hand on what their end game is for all this. But what's to say there is an end to this? I mean,
Yeah.
this could be, all right, we're to 14, we go to 16, and then hey, 18 sounds good. How about we take the whole Eastern Seaboard?
Yeah.
How about we just usurp the Big East? Let's just take the Big East and make that a Big Ten division.
Well, what if you get to
What's to
16
say
and then
that's
Notre
not the
Dame
end?
wakes up and says,
Yeah.
we
Well-
need in somewhere, take us.
What's to say this doesn't get to the point now where you've taken one ACC team? Let's say you potentially, when you go to 16, take two more. All of a sudden, you've crippled the ACC conceivably. I think that's a long way off. Are you trying to chase Notre Dame back into the Big Ten?
Yeah.
Okay, if you chase Notre Dame back into the Big Ten, then that gives you 17. You need an even number, so you got to get somebody else.
Well, back to Indiana and Purdue. I guess we've buried the lead a little bit, which we have a tendency to do around here, perhaps.
Yes.
But that's the status of Danny Hope and what this weekend will mean for him. As we've sort of said, it appears that it might come to an end, the Danny Hope era here soon, regardless of the outcome on Saturday. I suppose if there's a chance that he stays, it's with a win on Saturday, although that seems pretty remote to me. Just what do you think will be the situation here over the next few days for him, for Purdue, and for the program in general?
Well, first off, to the question of whether or not Saturday's outcome has any bearing on the decision, I would say it's possible, but at the same time, when you make these decisions, you very, very rarely make them on one game, and if you are, that's probably not the best plan of attack to do, because these are big, big decisions, and they have to come years in advance. They have to take into account countless factors. This isn't the pros where you just hand somebody a bunch of players, tell them to go coach them. You have recruiting implications. You have ways the program is structured that you have to keep in mind. And I really don't think that you should make these decisions based on one game. That said, we've talked a lot about this season and what was supposed to be this year in terms of last year being a step towards something bigger this year. It just didn't happen. Even if you end the game on a 3-game winning streak, get back to a bowl game, still probably not enough. So I think Purdue's obviously whatever Purdue does, it's going to be based on the totality of his time at Purdue, probably forgiving 2010 because of the injuries. So that gives you 3 full seasons to make your decision on. Is that enough time? We can debate that all day long. But you know what? It's college football. It's big business now, and it used to be 5 years. Now it's 3 years. So I don't know if I answered the question at all. I think what I see happening in the next couple days is I think Purdue's got to come out and say something pretty quickly. Now, if you have a bowl announcement Sunday, which you might, because I guess if Michigan loses and Purdue wins, the bowl structure falls into place pretty quickly. Do you make an announcement right away on top of a bowl? Do you scoop the bowl with something bigger? I have no idea. But you have to do something quick. If you're keeping them, you got to say so, because there's a lot of concerned recruits out there, obviously. Your fans all want to know what's happening. You got to sell tickets to the bowl game. If you're not keeping them, you got to get going right away. You have to get into the open market all in right now, because everybody else is going to open up here pretty soon. You have to start your search in earnest. I'm not saying they haven't already started their search. They've done some things behind the scenes, but you got to go all in as soon as possible.
Certainly should be interesting, to say the least. I mean, you look back at this season, and the 5-game losing streak obviously is the big key to the whole deal. And in my opinion, you just can't sell as high as what Danny Hope and company were selling, as far as we're not just a dark horse, we're a contender, and then come out and get beat pretty soundly in 4 of 5 games like you did, and not have some sort of negative repercussion from that. It just doesn't sit well from a fan point of view, I think, in particular, to be, people don't like to be told one thing and not have it delivered. I think you can deliver evenly, if that's the way to put it. You can deliver, or you can I'm not phrasing this right. You can tell people low and deliver high, or get it even or whatever.
Right.
But to not do that, I think really hurts.
Well, I think what happened is sometime around the end of the non-conference season, people got maybe a little bit carried away with Purdue. I think they were looking for something in the Leaders Division. Obviously, Penn State, Ohio State aren't eligible to go to the Big Ten title game. So I think people were looking for a dark horse, and I think they kind of latched on to Purdue after Purdue played really well at Notre Dame. I mean, on paper, it looked really good. I don't know if Danny Hope ever came out and said, we are Big Ten contenders. I don't think he ever denied it, which I don't know if you'd expect him to. I think expectations based on how Purdue played early in the year, they did play pretty good football in the non-conference season. I think expectations kind of got away from Purdue a little bit. Yeah. I'm not saying Danny Hope should have come out and said, look, we can't win the Big Ten, because you just cut your own throat with your fans that way. But I just don't know if he ever beat his chest about how great this team was. He did say before the season this was his best team, but it was easy to say that because you had so much experience coming back. But I don't know if he ever really jumped up and down on the table and said, we're going to win the Big Ten. I think other people did that for him. And I think that's where kind of things got away from Purdue a little bit in that sense.
We need to take a break. We will come back here in just a few minutes to talk a little about the men's basketball team as the Boilermakers get back in the win column on Wednesday night. So stick with us. We'll be back in just a moment on Gold and Black Live. Welcome back to Golden Black Live. Brian along with Kyle. We're the expert members of this panel anyway, as everyone else is off for the holiday weekend. Hopefully you've taken some time out from your turkey eating and shopping to join us here on the show as we talk Boilermaker football. And now turn our attention to Boilermaker basketball. Purdue getting a 66-40 victory against Powerhouse, as Brian called them earlier, UNC Wilmington on Wednesday. Purdue's record now 2-3. That was sarcasm, by the way, if you didn't pick that up.
Really?
Wilmington, they were good in the first half, struggled a little bit in the second half as they only scored, what? They scored less than
They scored 12 points
12
in the second
points?
half, yes.
Purdue was better,
A
though.
dozen, if you will.
A regular dozen, not a
regular,
baker's.
correct. If they'd scored a 13th point, that would have been a baker's dozen, but they didn't.
Purdue was better, though, I thought, in the second half.
Yeah.
They showed us something. It's a talented team. It's also a very young team.
Yes.
And I think we
Yes.
saw in New York that they are capable of making some mistakes down the stretch to lose games. But hopefully, as we move along here, they'll get better at that.
Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting basketball season. I think. Not only do you have a bunch of freshmen playing for Purdue, but you got a bunch of upperclassmen playing in different roles. So, really, this is a young team, but it's also more of a new team than it is a young team, just because so much has changed that I think it's going to take a little while longer than maybe we first might have given it credit for. Because I think we all kind of assumed that because they played over in Italy, they had the NCAA rules allowed coaches to work with players in the summer for the first time. I think we might have thought that perhaps this team would have been able to hit the ground running a little bit better than it has, but right now it's turning the ball over a lot. Obviously, it's very inconsistent offensively. It's very inconsistent in general. You obviously saw in New York City great stretches of basketball, terrible stretches of basketball, back to back, and the terrible stretches completely canceled out the great stretches. And I think you saw that. It was a perfect microcosm. Wednesday night, you saw a very, very marginal half by Purdue, where they needed a last-second three by Tyrone Johnson just to lead a team that had lost its last two games by an average of 40 points to not exactly powerhouse teams. And then in the second half, they absolutely dominated. As mentioned before, Wilmington only scored 12 points after halftime after scoring 28 in the first. So I thought you saw in the second half what Purdue's capable of. In the first half, I think you saw also what they're capable of on the other end of the spectrum. I think the first half was far more about Purdue than it was about Wilmington.
We all got a little spoiled by 2007, too, didn't we?
I think so.
I mean, you should have told us it wasn't going to be as easy.
I know, right?
He, of course, has told us it wasn't going to be. But,
Yeah.
I mean, that was a special case. I mean, those guys were not only good players, but seemed mature beyond their years, especially Robbie and Eachwan in particular. And I think the other veterans that they had on that team sort of meshed very well with the youth. And not that the veterans on this team are not meshing well with the youth, but I mean, that was a special group, and to expect that to replicate itself, 5 or 6 years later or whatever, is a little bit too much to ask.
Yeah. Well, with the 2007 team, everything just kind of fell into place right away. Those guys were so mature coming in the door. They were so accustomed to winning more than anything else that I just don't think they knew anything different. With this group, I'm not. It's not. First of all, it's unfair to compare this freshman class to that freshman class, because that group ended up leaving as one of the most accomplished classes in school history. This group, I think, on average, is just as talented as that one, but it might not have quite the intangibles yet. And there isn't anything wrong with that. I mean, expecting them to probably wouldn't have been fair, but I think this is just going to, as I said, this is just going to take some time. I think you have a lot of inexperience playing at very important positions. The one thing the 2007 team had, this one doesn't, was experience at point guard, because Keaton Grant had played at point guard the year before extensively for a team that ended up being pretty good, whereas this year Purdue's breaking in a true freshman at point guard, and that's kind of been up and down so far. I think anybody who's watched Ronnie Johnson play knows that's going to end well, because he's a really good player. But anytime you just take a freshman and put the ball in his hands, obviously there's going to be some unevenness there, and I think Purdue's living through that right now.
If you want to chime in with a question or a comment for us, you can do so on the chat below or over on the side of your screen there, whichever direction it is. You can submit a question via email as well. Not a lot of activity on the website today, as some of you are probably shopping or resting or gearing up for some football, which there are a couple of games, including one in the Big Ten this afternoon as Nebraska takes on Iowa in a game that's pretty important for the Cornhuskers. A word to our sponsors today as well. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow is a big day. Stay at HGI tonight. Also, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. You can reach him at trentismyagent.com or by calling him at 765-743-9595. And Follett's Purdue Pride, a Purdue game day tradition since 1945. So the Boilermakers in action again next week at Clemson. You know, somewhere along the way there, it feels like, you know, they're going to have to, I don't know if steal one back is the way to put it, but get one of these games maybe that they're not supposed to. And I'm not sure if this qualifies or not, but, you know.
It's a road game.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough, obviously.
Yeah. But it seems like a team that's capable of doing that because they can, you know, they have talent, so they can play maybe above expectations at times, which we saw during spurts.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's just, you know, you see spurts of really good basketball from this team, and then you see spurts of really bad basketball sometimes. It's just a matter of which one's going to consume the other one. There isn't any reason to think that this team can't capture the good stretches of basketball and make that the norm. There's also no reason to believe that the bad stretches of basketball can't grow and ruin the season.
Yeah.
I think at this point in time, after 5 games, it's still kind of a complete unknown.
I think a lot of people have been impressed with a couple of the big guys, A.J. Hammonds and Jay Simpson. That, you know, they're playing well. They're not still playing as many minutes maybe as what people want to see, but that's a product of maybe some of the mistakes they make on occasion, as long with simply a conditioning point of view probably for both those guys. And I didn't look at their exact average minutes, but it seems like it's probably somewhere around 20 for Hammonds and a little less maybe for Simpson at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance those guys, as the season goes on, can get some more minutes?
Yeah, I think A.J. Hammonds can play as much as he shows he can play, whether that be foul trouble, whether that be conditioning, whether that be defensive breakdowns. I still think, you know, there's some inexperience there that's perhaps holding him back a little bit. But, you know, with every game that goes by, theoretically, he should cut some of that stuff out a little bit. He should get better kind of as the season goes on. And I mean, he's done enough good things right now where you almost kind of wonder if he shouldn't be on the floor almost all the time as much as he can, because, you know, these past 2 games, he's probably been your best offensive player. You know, they're really featuring him on offense. What's kind of interesting about that is I think he's being featured on offense more at Purdue this year than he was at his prep school last year. I'm not sure he's even been a focal point for one of his team's offenses perhaps since his sophomore year in Carmel. So this is probably a big adjustment for him too. But I mean, he's certainly shown flashes of absolute brilliance as a scorer on the interior. It's funny because I figured he'd come in and impact his team defensively right away more than he did on offense. It's been the exact opposite. As for Simpson, you know, I still think maybe he's a little bit behind from a conditioning standpoint. I think there's, you know, still some mistakes happening there. I think, you know, foul trouble is going to catch up with him periodically. But, you know, he certainly does some things Purdue, the other guys in Purdue's front court can't. And, you know, there's certainly a role for him on this team.
Speaking of big guys playing well, though, it's my guy, Travis Carroll, who I think is playing pretty good,
He's
isn't
playing
he?
very well, yeah. Now,
I mean, maybe it's less pressure, perhaps.
Yeah.
A year older, stronger, knows his role a little bit better. But to me, he comes in there and he impacts the game.
Well, really, the way things are structured now, there's not a whole lot of pressure on him. He can just kind of go out there, do his thing. I don't know if anybody's really paying attention to him. He sneaks up on people, gets offensive rebounds and whatnot. You know, he can make an open jumper, too, and that's something the other 2 centers, I think Hammonds can shoot it a little bit, but I don't know if you want him shooting it because you want him down low. But I think that's something, you know, something this I certainly think there's a role here for Carroll. You know, of Purdue's centers, he's Purdue's best ball mover. And if you've watched their offense so far, it's one thing they're really struggling at. They're not moving the ball very well. They're not, you know, spacing out very well. They don't look like they got a lot of flow offensively a lot of the time. You know, and when Travis Carroll's in there, perhaps he can contribute that way too. And he's playing really hard, and he's smart, and that, you know, that stuff goes a long way.
Good question here from LDN again, and he wants to talk a little bit more about expansion and perhaps what it means for basketball. I think this is a good question because I've been curious myself, so that means I don't have an answer. Perhaps you do. Will expansion lead to divisions in hoops, in your opinion?
Depends what number they get to.
Is 14 not enough, you don't think?
Well, I don't know. That would just kind of well, what'll be interesting to see is if they just add games. What, you're playing 18 now?
For men's, yeah.
For
16
men's.
for women, yeah.
Well, what's to say now? The first step might be going from 18 to 20. That way,
You're playing
you
closer
can
to
leave
around,
the single
yeah.
game, number the same. But if they get to 18 one day, I mean, I just wouldn't see any way around splitting the conference in half and splitting them down into divisions. If they get to 16, I'd probably say yes. 14, I'm just not sure quite yet.
What was the Big East? The Big East was at 16 at their peak as a basketball conference?
Is it 16?
seems
or was
right.
it 18? I think it might have been 18.
18? Yeah, I mean, it seems like once you get to a certain number, you sort of have to. And the other thing is, you get to so many teams, and I know the Big East did it. Did everyone? If we're asking Big East questions, we don't know the answers to. Did everyone in the Big East qualify? They did not, right? That the bottom teams did not qualify for the conference tournament.
I think the bottom 4 or 6 teams, whatever it was, didn't qualify, and then they had double buys in their tournament because you had so many people still going.
Yeah, I think it'll certainly add a different flavor again to the league if you do end up going to divisions. I mean, do you see it sort of playing out that 4 16-team conferences that all play in a little playoff? Is that what we're headed toward?
That would seem like a long way off, but you figure the SEC could take the southeastern portion of the country. You figure the Big Ten right now is kind of moving into the whole northeastern quarter of the country. Obviously, you've still got some ACC schools left, and then obviously the Pac-12 has become pretty formidable. You have to figure out what's going to happen to the Big 12 now. But I just don't know. I mean, that's sort of a long way off, and the viability of there being 16 or 4 super conferences, just who knows. But just sort of the way this is going, I don't think anything would surprise me anymore. The way all the geographic integrity of college sports has just gotten completely blown up. You've got West Virginia playing in the Big 12 now. I mean, it's just don't know if there's any way of knowing.
Yeah. We talked a little bit earlier about some of the bigs for Purdue. Some of the guards I think have been inconsistent. Tyrone Johnson I think is getting healthier, probably close to 100%. You would know better than me at this point. Had a good game on Wednesday. His brother Ronnie has been inconsistent. I think it's probably to be expected from a freshman point guard. He was very good. He was good, I think. Maybe very as compared to maybe the expectations were in the first few games. Maybe has leveled off here a little bit recently. Just where do you see his progress at?
I think he's learning. I think he's starting to figure out the difference between high school basketball and college basketball. I think he wants to play fast all the time. At this level, at this school in particular, that's not reality. I think he's most comfortable right now playing in the full court, but Purdue isn't really getting out in the full court as much as probably he would like. Purdue has to generate some transitional opportunities here and there off its defense. It's doing that here and there, but not as consistently as it would need to really, really make Ronnie Johnson good right now. I think he has to acclimate to playing a half-court game. I think he has to acclimate to knowing when to pick his spots with those tough passes that could work against Westfield High School last year, but they're not going to work against Michigan State. I think he's been a little bit turnover prone, and it's what I said before about Hammonds is with every game, he should get better. I mean, it helps you so much just to play. I think that with every game, you should see a little bit of progress. Right now, he's not shooting the ball well. I think maybe that might be impacting other areas of his game too. Last year, as a high school senior, he shot the ball very well from three-point range, and right now he can't. He can't seem to buy one, and that's not the strength of his game. He can't let that affect him.
Question from Kyle on the board. Very good name, by the way. He wants to know, and we might have answered this earlier, I'm not sure, at what point in the season will we be able to expect Simpson and Hammonds to be caught up from a conditioning standpoint? Is that a possibility? Can you play your way into shape, in your opinion, during the season?
I think Hammonds is getting better and better every game. I mean, he seems like he's holding up pretty well, playing pretty significant minutes. Simpson, I think, could probably play more than he is. As Painter said last week, he can probably play another stretch or two, a half, but he can't play for longer in an individual stretch than he is right now. I think he really gets tired quickly. I think rest does him good. Now, the difference, obviously, between Simpson and Hammonds is Hammonds has been going all offseason, whereas Simpson, was hurt in the spring, and that basically cost him almost his whole offseason. So he's still way behind. But it stands to reason that with every game that goes by, with every practice that goes by, these guys should be getting better and better with not only as basketball players, but in terms of their bodies.
Before we take a break, just a quick note on the women's basketball team as well. They get a victory last night, really a pretty impressive win against a Marist team that's got a little bit of an injury problem, but a squad that's been an NCAA qualifier in recent years. But Purdue does not allow Marist, which shoots very well from three-point range, a three-pointer in the first half, 0 of 13, then just 5 of 27, which is not very good for the entire game. So that's the first win in the first game for them in the Paradise Jam tonight against Wake Forest, and then a showdown which might be a little bit of a measuring stick tomorrow against number 2 UConn. This is a Husky team that beat Wake, a lot to a very little yesterday. So we'll see how the Boilermakers, who are ranked number 14th now in the AP after a 4-0 start, see how they can do against the number 2 team in the country. We need to take a break. We'll be back to talk a little bit more football and basketball. You're listening to Gold and Black Live.
Going to the Purdue game? Stay at Hilton Garden Inn, West Lafayette at the Wabash Landing. Your family will love the well-appointed guest rooms, the pool, whirlpool, fitness center, the breakfast buffet, and the amazing Hilton Garden Inn staff. Located just 4 blocks from Purdue University, Hilton Garden Inn has long been the choice for Purdue fans. Call today for a reservation and make Hilton Garden Inn your #1 choice.
Check out the Purdue collection now at Follett's. Boiler up with Nike Fantastic T-shirts, League and Champion fashion colors. Simply fabulous, simply Follett's. Purdue pride everywhere on game day. Nike sideline, worn by the team, by the players, and by you. And make every day game day with tailgate toss. Follett's, Purdue pride, a Purdue tradition, 17 game day locations.
Wouldn't it be great if we could all rest this easy? Well, when it comes to meeting your insurance needs, you can. State Farm agent Trent Johnson is there to get you the coverage you need and the discounts you deserve. Home, car, life, even financial services. It's just part of being there. Call or visit Trent today. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Friday Night Frenzy. It's about tradition. It's about pride. It's about rivalries. It's about commitment. It's about teamwork. It's about the action of the game. On Friday nights, when area high school teams hit the field for the game, our team hits the field to get you the scores, the highlights, and all of the action. Friday Night Frenzy, a high school tradition.
Welcome back to Golden Black Live. Kyle Charters along with Brian Newbert. The A-team in today as everybody else is lounging about or doing their shopping or getting over their turkey coma or something on this Black Friday afternoon. I went over to a store earlier today and the line was very long and I was buying something just for myself and the darn lady in front of me taking forever and writing a check. Who writes a check anymore? Brian.
Not me.
Who's writing checks?
I would never do that to the people behind me in line.
I know, it was horrible. I couldn't believe it. Don't write the checks, people. No more checks. We're in whatever year this is. Don't do the checks. All right, let's move on.
On that note.
Back to football, and a special thanks to our sponsors this afternoon as well, who I'm sure appreciate my rant there. Hilton Garden Inn, when
Open
tomorrow
our check writers.
is a big day. Stay at HGI tonight. Also, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. You can reach him at trentismyagent.com or call 765-743-9595 and Follett's Purdue Pride, a Purdue game day tradition since 1945. All right, back to football, Brian. First, before we get to the question, with Danny Hope, he's been here for 4 years, the fifth as the transitional head coach or whatever we're going to call it, when he was the offensive line coach. I think 21 and 27 overall in the 3+ years. He got Purdue to a bowl game last year at above 500. Just, sort of how do you assess what he has done?
I think what probably defines it is highs and lows. I mean, that's kind of one thing with this whole program the last 4 years is they were capable of beating anybody. They were capable of almost beating anybody, but then they were capable of losing to anybody too. You go back to the 2009 season. This wasn't your typical rebuilding job. That was a pretty good team. That was maybe in hindsight the best team he had. You had Ralph Bolden as a sophomore. He was completely healthy that year. You had Joey Elliott. He turned into a pretty good player. Obviously, as the season went on, maybe not right away. He wasn't as good as he was going to be. You obviously had a defense that had Ryan Kerrigan, that had Kawan Short as a young player, but those are still guys with a lot of talent. That team lost a lot of close games. I think, he certainly, there was certainly some talent on that team. When you look at the offense, I just talked about Bolden and Elliott. You also had Aaron Valentine and Keith Smith, two of the better weapons. Desmond Tardy, I think, too, right?
And Ralph, did you mention Ralph?
Well, yeah, I mentioned Ralph Bolden before. That was a team that easily, could have won. It just didn't. It lost a bunch of close games. So I think maybe that season wasn't the best reflection on this coaching staff. 2010, I think you throw out. You had so many injuries. I mean, just an unprecedented amount of injuries at important positions. I just don't think you can even factor that in. 2011, obviously, we talked about that earlier. You got back to where you wanted to be in the postseason, but you wanted that season to be a step towards something better. And this year was the one that was supposed to be something better. You look at a team that brought back more starters than anybody in the Big Ten from a team that had a winning season last year. Theoretically, this team should have been a lot better. And it was early in the year, and it has been at times. But then, you lose those 5 games in the middle of the season, all goes out the window. So I think, you just kind of look at the general inconsistency. You're able to beat Ohio State when they're whatever they were in the country a couple years ago. But then at the same time, you lose at Northern Illinois at home. It's just all over the map. You almost win at Oregon.
Yeah.
You almost win at Notre Dame and Ohio State this year. It's just you just can't quite reconcile all that stuff, that inconsistency. So I think that's what defines it.
And in the preseason, before the very first game of the year, Morgan Burke on our Saturday morning radio show came on and said the inconsistency is something that I want to see cleaned up this season. We don't want to see the highs and lows, we being from his point of view. It can't have a close game 1 week and then get beat by a pretty mediocre Minnesota team.
Yeah, exactly.
The very next week. So I think that is one thing that when Judgment Day, if you will, if it comes, will be one of the hot topics. We talk about 2009, and that's not just you talking from hindsight either. I think if people want to look back at their GBI archives, if they have such a thing, we talked. You in particular wrote down your thoughts on that team at the time, and that team was talented enough to win. And if you look at that team had a 5-game losing streak early in the season, much like this one did, but those games were extremely competitive. I mean, Purdue to Notre Dame, a couple decisions might have cost them that game down the stretch. They were, in about every one of those games early on, losing by, 5 points or less. I think the 5 losses combined for 22 points, or
Something
4
like
for
that,
18,
yeah.
or whatever
4
it
for 18,
was.
I
So,
think that sounds right.
that was a talented, I thought, enough team to get some victories, and I think that goes. I don't know if overlooked is the right word, but it was a solid group that Joe Tiller, I think, had left over. Not a complete group.
Right.
That would be way too much
Right,
to say, but
right, no.
but a group that could win.
Yeah, I mean, there were certainly some flaws with that team. They turned the ball over quite a bit. Whether
Yeah.
you want to put that on the players or what, I don't know. But during that losing streak through the course of the season, it was kind of one thing after another, kind of new and unusual ways to lose games. Special teams breakdowns, turnovers, what have you. It's just, just the best way to put it is that team was talented enough to win. It just didn't.
We get a question from Phil, and we might have come close to answering this question in the first segment, but he asked, what are the chances of Purdue letting go of Danny Hope? I don't know if we can speak in absolutes or put an exact number on that, but it sounds like from talking to you that it's a pretty good chance. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a possibility. Quite honestly, I would think that I would lean toward expecting it to happen more than I would lean toward expecting him to remain. I just think that, when you kind of look in the big picture and you have to make these decisions based on the big picture, not based on did they beat IU, that sort of thing. I just think this season was supposed to be something more than last season, and best case scenario right now is you match last season. And I just think that nowadays in college football, you have to have a short leash on this kind of stuff. I'm not saying it's necessarily fair. I'm also pointing out that these decisions don't always come down to wins and losses. What they come down to is your program, and right now Purdue's got a lot of empty seats in Ross-Ade Stadium, and sometimes these decisions have to be made on those sort of factors more than anything, and sometimes the coach is just kind of collateral damage in that.
That is a big issue.
It's a huge issue.
It's a huge
yeah.
issue. The attendance issue, because it was not up to average, I think is a
Right.
good way to put it, against Penn State a few weeks ago, and it will fall short of the season average, which is the lowest since 1992, most likely, unless there is a big walk-up crowd, which seems also unlikely given the weather expected tomorrow. So, I mean, you're below average, which is below average here for the last couple of weeks, if you can follow that logic a little bit. And I think that's pretty big factor as well. Wiley asked, if Hope stays, a new OC is probably a given, but if no extension with Hope, just how good an OC could we attract, discounting because of Purdue's low assistant salaries?
First off, one little distinction that needs to be probably drawn here is that Purdue doesn't have to extend Danny Hope if they decide not to fire him. There's no need for a contract extension like there was last year, because last year his contract had reached a point where it could become a problem in recruiting. It had gotten down to 3 years, I think, and you always want to have 5. So I don't think if Purdue opts to keep Hope, I don't think there's going to be an extension associated with it. As for the offensive coordinator, I will tell you this: if Danny Hope is back at Purdue next year and Gary Nord is physically able to perform, he will be the offensive coordinator. I promise you that. He is his guy, and he will be until the day he leaves here. Obviously, Gary Nord's situation is what it is. Who knows whether or not he's even going to be able to coach next year? I think he's in pretty bad shape after his accident where he injured his back. Hypothetically speaking, if Purdue were to have an opening for a coordinator, it would be very difficult to go on the open market and get a very good one unless you ramp up your salaries pretty significantly. I think if Purdue hires a new coach, I think you're going to see a bump in salaries. Whether you can do that now with the existing staff, should it remain, I just don't know if that's going to happen. I'll go back to when Hope was first hired. He needed a defensive coordinator after Brock Spack took the Illinois State job. He searched for a month and then ended up hiring his guy from Eastern Kentucky, Don Landholm, who he could have hired a day after Brock Spack left. And that says to me that for whatever reason, he had a very hard time attracting talent in the open market. Whether that was salaries, whether that was, I just don't know. But it has been pretty difficult to go out and get I think, pretty talented coaches. I'm not saying anything against the coaches Purdue has. I'm just saying it's not like Purdue can just go out on the open market and pick its guy, and that guy automatically wants to come. And if Hope is back next season, obviously it's going to be very tenuous, just like it is right now. And coaches you're trying to hire are aware of that kind of thing. They would understand. Just like I'm sure this was an issue last year too, when he had to go out and hire a couple coaches. Those coaches are probably aware that I might take this job at Purdue and I might be out after a year, and that very well may happen. If Hope is back next year, it's going to be even worse.
Has the salary culture changed at all in the aftermath, I guess, of Matt Painter and things? I mean, does that
for basketball it has?
What about for assistant coaches for football? You think there's a? I mean, you said.
I think that will be a priority. If there's a new staff in place, I think they will have to up their salary. Whether you can just do that with an existing staff, I'm not entirely sure that you wouldn't just kind of put that off until you can start from the ground up. Now, is that fair to the existing staff? No, but that's kind of life at this level of college football. Yeah. It's a business, man.
A couple of minutes left here in the big show. So what do you expect to see tomorrow? I mean, my expectations are I
on
don't
what
know.
front?
Yeah. Yeah, on the football field front. Your expectations.
On the football field, I expect Purdue to run the ball right up the middle, early and often with Akeem Shavers. Indiana to have a hard time stopping it. Hopefully, Ralph Bolden can play. I'm assuming he's not going to play, but I'm assuming that based on nothing. If he does play, you want to give him and Shavers the ball against a defense that can't stop anybody in the running game. Can't stop anybody. And, that's the phase of the game that's been clicking pretty well for Purdue here in these last two games that they've won. So I would expect Purdue to keep it simple. Don't overthink things. Give Akeem Shavers the ball, run right up the middle, and try to win the game. And then I think what you want to do defensively is obviously you got to keep them in front of you. Don't give up any big plays. Hopefully you can get your first turnover in a couple weeks. You just want to keep this out of a shootout. You just want to, be able to control the ball on the ground, perhaps make a couple big plays in the passing game off of your ground game, and then just kind of hold on for dear life against their offense. I don't think this game is a layup for Purdue by any means. I think the days of Purdue assuming wins over Indiana are over, at least for the time being. But it should be a competitive game, but I think the matchups for Purdue are pretty good, especially with their offense.
They have gotten turnovers recently. It's an amazing stat. They finally got turnovers last week. They didn't score off them, and it's been since Michigan.
I should have clarified interception.
Right, interception. They have not had one since the second half against the backup quarterback against Ohio State. But they have not scored off a turnover, which tells you a little bit how inconsistent, I guess, the offense has been here in the recent stretch. Since Michigan, it's hard to believe you could go that long. And they've had some short fields, too, including last week against Illinois, and not able to score a point. So, as far as what I see, I think Purdue, and we'll have our predictions if they're not up. They will be up shortly on the site. But I think Purdue, can get a narrow victory against Indiana. I agree with Brian. You got to run the ball because Indiana has given up, an average of 220 or more, I think, maybe a little bit more than that on average rushing yards per game. And Purdue, the last 2 weeks against Iowa, and when they finally decided to start doing it in the last three quarters against Illinois last week, has just been able to run the ball up. If there's one thing the offensive line is doing well, it seems, they run block better than they pass block, and so they do seem to get some push here, at least against the fronts of Iowa and Illinois. So you'd think they could do the same against Indiana. You got anything else? You good? You going to Clemson next week?
Going to Clemson next week. Yep.
You looking forward to it? Have you been to Clemson before?
Yeah, I was there in 2007.
They played there in 2007.
So this is my second trip to Clemson for basketball.
All right. Well, have fun with that. I'll probably see you sometime between then and or now and then.
I'll be at the game tomorrow.
I'll be there too.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we've covered that. I don't know where you'll be. Hopefully you'll be at the game as well, or somewhere near a television or a radio.
Still be at Target.
Do what?
Still be at Target.
Still
stand in line at Target.
All right, that'll do it for us. A special thanks today to Gordon Jackson and Becca, whose last name I didn't catch, who's back there working as well. Short crew today, so they're about running around getting us getting us on here this afternoon. Also, thanks to Brian as well as our sponsors, Hilton Garden Inn. When tomorrow is a big day, stay at HGI tonight. Also, State Farm agent Trent Johnson. You can reach him at TrentIsMyAgent.com or call him at 765-743-9595. And Follett's Purdue Pride, a Purdue game day tradition since 1945. That'll do it for us. For Brian, I'm Kyle. Thanks for watching Gold and Black Live.